Today we're at Fotheringhay Castle, a site which had two incredibly important events happen here. You're probably thinking though, where on earth is the castle? Well, behind me, this piece of rock is literally all that exists at Fotheringhay Castle. It's the place where one of England's most notorious kings, King Richard III, was born, in the keep just behind me, which would have sat on top of that big hill there, on top of the motte. But Fotheringhay Castle is remembered more specifically for one event. One bloody event during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, one event that had a massive impact on many people inside of her kingdom. This is the site where Mary Queen of Scots was executed. Mary had been a pest for Elizabeth for a long time. She was seen as the Catholic rival to Elizabeth. Many Catholics wanted Mary on the throne, and many would risk their lives to put her there. But Mary had been imprisoned for 18 years inside of various different castles across England. But it was here, in this very, very small castle in Northamptonshire, by the River Nen, where Mary Queen of Scots was beheaded and executed in very, very brutal fashion. We know lots of things about Mary Queen of Scots' execution, including the fact that it did not go well. It did not go as well as it could have done. So join us today as we look at Fotheringhay Castle, the site where Mary Queen of Scots was executed and also where Richard III was born. Remember to support our channel, please make sure as always to subscribe. So today Fotheringhay is a very, very quiet village in Northamptonshire, but it's hard to think that during the Tudor period this was a place where there was a big castle behind me, where there would have been a big keep sat on top of the little motte, but also where one of the most significant events in the reign of Elizabeth I took place, the execution of Mary Queen of Scots. Throughout Elizabeth's reign she faced a number of different plots to overthrow her and take her off the throne. She went about persecuting Catholics, and this caused a number of issues with Catholics in England. She wanted everyone to be Protestant and adhere to her new religious settlement, which was a Church of England which was favouring more Protestants than Catholics. Because of this unease in the country with Catholics, people began to plot against Elizabeth. There were three major plots she faced. The first was the Ridolfi plot, a plot from Europe to overthrow Elizabeth, kill her and place Mary Queen of Scots on the throne. The second was the Throckmorton plot, a domestic plot that happened inside of England, which had the same desired outcome: kill Elizabeth I, put Mary Queen of Scots on the throne. And the final plot, which was the final nail in the coffin for Mary Queen of Scots, was the Babington Plot, where Anthony Babington and his group of co-conspirators got together and tried to overthrow Elizabeth and put Mary on the throne. The Babington Plot was discovered by Sir Francis Walsingham and his network of spies that were working to try and uncover different attacks against Elizabeth and to try and foil them. But the Babington Plot caught Mary red-handed. She had been conversing in letter form with Anthony Babington, and these were hidden inside of beer barrels to get into her castle where she was being held in prison. And this was evidence that could not be disputed. This was evidence that literally found Mary Queen of Scots guilty of treason, and Elizabeth reluctantly had to sign her death sentence and death warrant. She was convinced to do so by the Privy Council, even though we know really Elizabeth I probably didn't want Mary Queen of Scots dead. To kill an anointed queen of another country, for example, was considered against the rules of God and the work of God, which would greatly upset many people across the country. But where did Mary's execution take place? We know it didn't really take place in the keep that was here. It took place in a place known as the Great Hall. With castles, the Great Hall in many places stood inside of the bailey, which was the inside enclosure of a castle where you could usually find soldiers living, you could find blacksmiths working, and so on. It was a really sociable place, but a Great Hall was sometimes kept outside of the keep, and that was the case at Fotheringhay. And inside of the Great Hall, it was where Mary Queen of Scots was beheaded. So here you can see the only remaining part of Fotheringhay Castle. This is masonry from the castle's keep, which would sit on the hill behind, and you can see that this is all what is left. You can see a little bit which is finely cut around here, but that's all that remains of Fotheringhay Castle. And a lot of the stonework went to actually building the church and also the buildings around the village. So we are now stood on Fotheringhay Castle's keep, and it's down here where the Great Hall would have been, where Mary Queen of Scots would have been executed. We're on top of the motte where the keep would have stood, and it would have been a very, very small sort of castle. But most of the action here would have taken place inside of the bailey. And inside here, roughly down here, was where the Great Hall stood, inside of the bailey. It was here where Mary Queen of Scots made a short walk from where she was being kept into the Great Hall, where she was then met by the executioner, a man who stood there on a scaffold with an axe, who would take her life. It's crazy to think that in this small rural village on top of a windy hill, this is where it all took place. This is where 500 years ago a shocking execution occurred during the Tudor period. Today, where sheep graze, that's where it all happened. That's where Mary Queen of Scots' blood ran on the scaffold. For Mary, Fotheringhay wasn't just the site of her execution, it was also the site of the last place where she would be held as a prisoner. For 18 years she had been a prisoner of Queen Elizabeth I and had been held in many different sites all around England. With Mary Queen of Scots, we know that she welcomed death with open arms. She was actually relieved that her death was coming. She'd been imprisoned for 18 years of her life. When she came to England, after being ousted off the throne in Scotland, she probably never realised that Elizabeth would hold her prisoner for so long. And because of that, she grew tired and fed up with being incarcerated for so long. Yes, her imprisonment wasn't like a normal imprisonment, which we would consider. For example, being put in the Tower of London, being subject to torture on the rack or so on. She was living in relative comfort. However, the fact she wasn't a free woman must have played on her mind. And that's why we must consider that's probably the reason why she agreed to the Babington Plot. It was through sheer desperation to get some freedom and get out and break out that she probably decided to be involved in the plot. But the Babington Plot, as mentioned, was a final nail in the coffin of Mary Queen of Scots.
It was said of her execution, then groping for the block, she laid down her head, putting her chin over the block with both her hands, which, holding there still, had been cut off had they not have been espied. Then lying upon the block most quietly and stretching out her arms, she cried, in manus tuus Dominin, 3 or 4 times. Then she, lying very still upon the block, one of the executioners holding her slightly with one of his hands, she endured 2 strokes of the other executioner with an axe, she making very small noise or none at all, and not stirring any part of her from the place where she lay. And so the executioner cut off her head, saving one little gristle, which being cut asunder, he lifted up her head to the view of all the assembly, and bade God save the Queen. Then her dress of lawn, or wig, fell from her head. It appeared as grey as one of 70 years old, polled very short, her face in a moment being so much altered from the form she had when she was alive, as few could remember her by her dead face. Her lips stirred up and down for 1/4 of an hour after her head was cut off.
So in the shadow of Fotheringhay Castle's keep, this is the area where the Great Hall stood, where Mary Queen of Scots was executed. I hope you've enjoyed our look at Fotheringhay Castle and the execution of Mary Queen of Scots. As always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe to The Fortress, which leaves us one more thing to say. Today, where the sheep feast on the grass, one queen was put out of her misery at last. Thanks for watching.